The snow came down in thick, relentless sheets that night, turning the Montana landscape into a white void where earth and sky merged into one endless expanse of cold. Sarah's hands trembled on the steering wheel, not just from the frigid air seeping through the car's broken heater, but from the fear that had been her constant companion for the past 3 days. In the back seat, wrapped in every blanket she owned, her 6-month-old daughter Emma slept fitfully, her small chest rising and falling with each precious breath. The car had started making that terrible grinding noise about 5 miles back, and now the engine light blazed red on the dashboard like an accusation. Sarah had no money for repairs. She had no money for much of anything anymore, not since she'd finally gathered the courage to pack their things in the middle of the night and leave Marcus and his rage behind. The bruise on her cheekbone had faded to a yellowish purple, but the fear in her bones remained fresh and sharp. When the car finally shuddered to a complete stop, Sarah felt something inside her break. She sat there for a moment, listening to Emma's soft whimpers beginning to escalate, and realized she was crying. The road stretched empty in both directions, a ribbon of white disappearing into darkness. She'd passed a ranch turnoff about a quarter-mile back, had seen the distant glow of lights through the storm. It was either that or freeze to death out here. Sarah bundled Emma against her chest, grabbed the diaper bag with numb fingers, and began walking. The wind cut through her thin jacket like knives, and her sneakers, already soaked through, crunched through snow that came up past her ankles. Emma was crying now, really crying, that desperate wail that meant she was cold and hungry and scared. Sarah tried to shield her with her own body, bent forward against the wind, following the fence line that she prayed would lead to those lights. By the time she saw the house, a low-slung ranch structure with warm light glowing from its windows, Sarah was sobbing openly. Her feet had gone numb, her hands ached from clutching Emma so tightly, and her daughter's cries had weakened to something that terrified her more than the screaming. She stumbled up the porch steps, nearly fell, and pounded on the door with what little strength she had left. The door opened, and Sarah found herself looking up at a man who seemed carved from the same unyielding landscape that surrounded them. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with weathered skin and gray threading through his dark hair. His eyes, a startling blue even in the dim porch light, took in the scene before him with an expression Sarah couldn't read. She opened her mouth to speak, to explain, to beg, but all that came out was a choked sound somewhere between a plea and an apology. "Get in," he said. They were the first words he spoke to her, delivered in a low, rough voice that brooked no argument. He stepped aside, and Sarah practically fell through the doorway into blessed warmth. Her legs gave out, and she sank to the floor just inside the entrance, still clutching Emma, who was now barely whimpering. The man moved with surprising speed for his size. He disappeared for a moment and returned with blankets, wrapping one around Sarah's shoulders before gently taking Emma from her frozen arms. Sarah wanted to protest, to hold on to her baby, but she couldn't make her arms work properly. She watched through tears as he unwrapped the wet blankets from Emma, checking her over with careful, practiced hands. "She's cold, but she'll be all right," he said, wrapping her in a dry, warm blanket. "You got here in time." He handed Emma back to Sarah, then crouched down to look at her wet feet. Without asking permission, he carefully removed her soaked sneakers and socks, his expression darkening at the sight of her blue-tinged toes. He disappeared again and came back with a basin of water that was warm but not hot, easing her feet into it with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. "Gotta warm you up slow," he explained. "You might get frostbite otherwise." Sarah finally found her voice. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm sorry to bother you. My car broke down and I didn't know where else to go. We were just so cold." He stood, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. She wondered what he saw, a desperate woman with a bruised face, running from something, bringing her trouble to his doorstep. But if he judged her, his face didn't show it. "I'm Cole," he said. "Cole Harrison. This is my ranch." "Sarah," she managed. "And this is Emma." He nodded once, as if that settled something, then disappeared into what she assumed was the kitchen. Sarah heard the sound of a microwave, cabinets opening and closing. He returned with a bottle of warmed formula, apparently kept on hand for some reason she was too exhausted to question, and handed it to her. "For the baby," he said. "You need to eat something too. When did you last have a proper meal?" Sarah couldn't remember. 2 days ago. 3. She'd been rationing the money she had, trying to stretch it as far as possible, prioritizing formula and diapers over food for herself. Cole seemed to read the answer in her silence. He returned to the kitchen, and soon the smell of soup heating on the stove filled the house. As Emma drank her bottle with desperate hunger, Sarah looked around. The house was neat and sparse, decorated with the kind of functional simplicity that spoke of a man living alone. There were photos on the mantel above the fireplace, and even from across the room, Sarah could see they showed a younger Cole with a woman and a small child. All three of them smiling, frozen in a moment of happiness that clearly belonged to the past. Cole brought her soup and bread, setting it on the coffee table within reach. He added wood to the fire that was already burning in the fireplace, building it up until the room glowed with warmth. Then he sat in a chair across from her, his large hands resting on his knees, and waited while she ate. "There's a storm warning," he finally said. "Roads are going to be closed by morning, probably for a few days. You and the baby are welcome to stay until it clears and we can get your car towed." Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks again. "I can't pay you," she admitted. "Not right now. I don't have much money." "Didn't ask you to pay," Cole said simply. "Why are you helping us?" The question burst out of her, raw and confused. "You don't know us. We could be anyone." For the first time, something shifted in Cole's expression, a flicker of old pain crossing his weathered face. His eyes went to the photos on the mantel. "Had a wife and daughter once," he said quietly. "Lost them 5 years ago in a car accident. Winter night, black ice, wrong place at the wrong time." He was silent for a moment, then looked back at her. "I think about that night a lot. Wonder if they were scared, if they were cold. Wonder if someone might have helped them if things had been different." Understanding washed over Sarah, followed by a fresh wave of grief for this silent man's loss. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. He shook his head. "Life goes on. But when I see a woman and baby on my doorstep in a snowstorm, I'm not turning them away. Simple as that." Over the next 3 days, as the storm raged outside and the roads became impassable, Sarah discovered that Cole Harrison was a man of few words but steady action. He set her up in his daughter's old room, which he'd kept exactly as it was, with a crib still standing in the corner and cheerful yellow curtains on the windows. He never asked about the bruise on her face or why she was really running. He simply made space for them in his life with the same quiet competence he seemed to bring to everything. He showed Sarah how to bottle feed the calves in the barn when their mothers rejected them, letting her help with the ranch work when she insisted she needed to do something to earn their keep. He sat by the fire in the evenings, reading while Emma played on a blanket nearby, occasionally looking up to offer Sarah a cup of coffee or point out when the baby needed changing, as if he'd been reading infant cues all along. On the 4th day, when the storm finally cleared and the snowplows came through, Cole helped Sarah arrange for her car to be towed to town. He drove her to meet with a mechanic, Emma strapped into an old car seat he'd pulled from storage, brushed clean of dust and still perfectly safe. The mechanic's estimate made Sarah's heart sink. More money than she had, more than she could possibly gather. "I can fix it," the mechanic said, "but it'll take a few days for the parts to come in, and I'll need payment up front." Sarah felt the familiar panic rising in her chest. She'd have to call someone, maybe her sister in Seattle, beg for help, admit how badly she'd failed. But before she could speak, Cole pulled out his wallet. "Put it on my account," he told the mechanic. "And don't rush it. Make sure it's done right." "Cole, no," Sarah protested. "You've already done too much. I can't let you." "Consider it payment for helping with the calves," he said in that matter-of-fact way of his that made arguments seem pointless. "Fair trade." They both knew she'd helped with the calves for all of 2 days, and that it was hardly equal to hundreds of dollars in car repairs, but Sarah found herself unable to refuse. The relief was too overwhelming, and the kindness in his eyes too genuine. She realized then that she was crying again, and that Emma was reaching for Cole with her small hands, having grown used to his presence in just a few short days. That evening, as they sat by the fire with Emma asleep in the crib upstairs, Sarah finally told Cole the truth. About Marcus and his temper, about the escalating violence, about the night she'd packed their things and run while he was passed out drunk. About the fear that still lived in her bones, the worry that he'd find them, that she'd never really be free. Cole listened without interrupting, his face grave. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "My ranch is remote," he finally said. "Closest neighbor is 10 miles away. If you and Emma needed a place to stay for a while, until you figure things out, there's room here. I could use help with the ranch, and I pay fair wages. No strings attached." Sarah stared at him, this silent rancher who'd taken them in without question, who'd given them warmth and food and safety and now offered them something even more precious, time and space to heal. "Why would you do that?" she asked. Cole looked at the fire, his profile etched in shadow and light. "Maybe because helping you helps me too," he said quietly. "This house has been too quiet for too long. Maybe it's time it remembered what it was like to have life in it again." Sarah didn't answer right away. She thought about the long road ahead, about healing and building a new life, about learning to trust again. She thought about Emma growing up on this ranch, surrounded by snow-capped mountains and endless sky, with a man who'd shown them more genuine kindness in 4 days than her daughter's own father had in a lifetime. "Okay," she whispered. "If you're sure, we'll stay." Cole nodded once, that simple gesture of his that seemed to settle things as definitively as a handshake or a signed contract. Outside, the Montana night was clear and cold and filled with stars. Inside, the fire crackled, and somewhere upstairs, a baby slept peacefully, and 2 broken people sat in comfortable silence, beginning the slow work of becoming whole again.